All right, everybody, welcome back. I hope you had a nice break, that you were able to stretch your legs a little bit, maybe get a little water. We have 3 really great lectures lined up for you this afternoon. I'm very excited to dive in, but before we do, we just have a few housekeeping items. First, I just want to reiterate gratitude for everybody's flexibility this afternoon. We love this building of ours, but it can offer some special challenges, so thank you for just going with the flow. And to that point, we are going to have a Q&A after the end of the lectures in order to give everybody in this room and in the members' room as consistent an experience as possible. We're going to do the Q&A by having written questions. So if you have a question as we go, please just raise your hand. My wonderful colleague Eric will come over. He has pencils and papers. We'll gather them at the end, and then we'll get through as many as we can. So that said, I'm thrilled to be on stage with these 3 this afternoon. First, we're going to hear from Adrien Legendre. Adrien is the head of Rare Books and Manuscripts at Christie's Paris. Following him, we're going to have Patrick Hastings. Patrick is the English chair at the Gilman School in Baltimore. And then we're going to round it up with Gabby Cooksey, who is a book artist and binder from Tacoma, Washington. So we're going to start with Adrien, who's going to walk us through the wonderful world of livres d'artistes. So without further ado, please welcome Adrien.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to start by thanking Emily and Stephanie for having me here. It's really an honor, and I'm extremely stressed, so apologize if there's a little bumps. So I'm going to do is it? Okay, so I'm going to try to give you a brief history of the artist book, livres d'artistes, as well. We can call them as well livres de peintre. A definition is obviously subjective. We're talking about art, so I'm going to put some labels on a few things that are not definitive and can be argued, obviously. So the first slide, it's going to be a definition. So the term livre d'artiste of artist books come usually from the publishing practice of the art dealers early in the 20th century, through which they showcased the work of artists they represented. This luxury edition marketed the collector of fine art, featured original print, illustrating a classical or contemporary text. The main criteria, though, is the fame and posterity of the artist. There's an important difference between bibliophilia between an artist and an illustrator. So in the Aramont collection, in its importance, you will have more books by illustrators. I mean, not more, but you will have books by illustrators and artist books, which are different. So illustrated books have always existed since the illustrated incunabulous Bibles bearing woodcut to the 20th century illustrated books by illustrator, mostly or even only through the book's illustration. It does not matter if the illustrations are original, although artist books tend to have original prints. The constellation we were talking, I mean, Stephanie and Gordon was talking earlier, has original lithograph by Miro, but the constellation are reproduction, which is a difference in terms of quality and supervising the artist. So, in addition to the definition of the livre d'artiste, is more importantly an adaptation of an artist by an artist of a text. Illustration with no text, even in volumes, would be defined by a suite of prints. I come back with the set of Goya's Capriccios that it's been told about earlier. I would not consider it as a livre d'artiste. It's more a set of prints because it doesn't illustrate a text, obviously. So I could say an artist's book is a collaboration work between an artist and an author, but some, if not most, of the 20th century artist books are texts chosen by the artist and not always a real collaboration with an author, a contemporary author, and a contemporary artist. We've seen many artists illustrating antiques or classic text. In the Aramont collection, for example, many examples of these classic texts are represented, including Longus, Daphnis and Chloe, illustrated by Bonnard. We've got as well a lot of works illustrated by Georges Braque, including Hesiod Theogonia. So we're here in the antique Greece. Lucian Dialogues as well, illustrated by Henri Laurens, which is in the Aramont collection as well. And to be honest, most of the books illustrated by Henri Laurens are based on classic text. Picasso, which will come quite often in my presentation, is also very interesting in his choice of text, because the first books he illustrated was poems and text by his friends from Montmartre when they were unsuccessful and they were very poor, and those were André Salmon, for example, in Poems in 1905, and especially Marc Jacob, who was his very great friends in the 1910s, that we got Le Cornéadé, published in 1917, which you can see the Cubist plate here. In the 1930s, he started to illustrate classic text as well, classic 19th century text. We've talked about the Chef-d'œuvre inconnu by Balzac earlier as one of Stephanie's favorite books, one of. I agree. That you not this one. After World War II, in parallel with his own art, was reinterpreting or analyzing the Spanish old master painters like Velázquez. He started to illustrate old Spanish text, including 20 poems by Luis de Góngora and Argote, which is this profile on the left of the screen, as well as Le Frère Mendiant in 1959, which is on the right of the slide. So now that we have, I have tried to define a livre d'artiste, we need to know when it has started. So as the definition, the date of birth is quite subjective. If we follow the general definition of the livre d'artiste of the publishing practice by art dealers, then the first livre d'artiste is considered as Verlaine parallèlement illustrated by Bonnard, which is in the Aramont Library. But at the same time, it's hard not to take into account some other masterpieces of livre d'artiste or books illustrated by great artists, including this in the middle. It's The Faust, illustrated by Eugène Delacroix, published in 1828. The third plate is an illustration by Édouard Manet, who illustrated the translation by Mallarmé of The Raven by Poe. And before that, in the 18th century, the monumental edition of La Fontaine's Fable, on the right, is illustrated by renowned artist Jean-Baptiste Oudry, could be eventually considered a livre d'artiste. But for simplicity and clarity, I'm going to stick on the 20th century livre d'artiste, and agreed that Parallèlement is the first one. So in this presentation, instead of focusing on the artist book in general, I'm going to focus and to try to present the man in the shadow of the publication, who are the publisher. So we've mentioned already Vollard, who is one of the main actor of this publication and production in the 20th century, especially the first half, because he died in a car accident in 1939. I'm going to talk about Daniel-Henri Kainweller, who was a cubist, a gallerist with represented cubist artist. And I'm going to mention as well Aimé Mags, Gérald Kramer, and Yvon Lambert later, because it's a circle of art dealers producing livres d'artistes all across the 20th century until now. Second, I'm going to talk of what I called, probably wrongly, a free-spirited publisher, which had not a small production, but they really took the livre d'artiste as a way of expressing art instead of promoting someone. Those are Pierre-Henri Benoit, also called Pab, which is a fantastic character. Ilias, who is a Georgian artists who were part of the avant-garde movement in Russia before 1920 and moved to Paris and become publisher in the 1940. And then I'll mention briefly the art publisher who were publisher of art review and art books, not artist books, but art books, and who in their publication put some very important stone in the building of the livre d'artiste. Those are Christian Zervos, Thériade, and later Skira. And if I have time, which I doubt, I will mention briefly the bindings and the deluxe copy. So we can start with, so those are the publisher I'm going to talk about. Sorry, I'm not used to. So Ambroise Vollard. Ambroise Vollard was born in 1866, died in 1936. He opened a gallery specialized in prints at the end of the 19th century in Paris, and become very interested by the avant-garde artistic movement, especially Nabis. So his publication, he made a couple of publications before 1900, but really the start of the livre d'artiste is this magnificent Parallèlement, which the Aramont Library has a copy, which is funny because, as you may see on the cover of the books, it is printed under the patronage of the Imprimerie Nationale. So basically, the French states agreed to finance a little bit the publication because they thought it was a geometry book. Unfortunately, when the first copies came out, they realized it wasn't at all. It's more an erotic book, actually. So you have two kind of copies. The bibliophile would want the Imprimerie Nationale on the paper, but you can find them without and just with Ambroise Vollard Publishing, which are the same book. It's just you can't give the little anecdote about it. So he published mainly, almost only the artists he was representing, including the nabis like Bonnard, Denis, Rodin, Degas, Rouault, and Picasso. All these artists were represented by Vollard, of course. So I'm not going to go through all his production, but as it was mentioned by Stephanie, I think its masterpiece is the Balzac Chef de Braconnier illustrated by Picasso, which is here in the middle, for several reasons. The livre d'artiste is really the association of a text and an artist. And I'm not going to say again in a worse way what Stephanie says, but the content of the text is really reflecting on Picasso's reflection of his own art and the evolution he took along his career. So it's really, really a fantastic book. And the Aramont Library has a copy bound by Germaine de Coster, artist binders, women, like a lot of those. And which is very interesting is that she got inspired by the illustration to have the design of the binding, which is, in my opinion, what should be done. Vollard was also a writer, which is one of probably the only one who was publisher, gallerist, and writers. And he met Alfred Jarry at the beginning of the 19th century, the creator of the Ubu character. And so he wrote a book that he published in 1932, which was the Réincarnation du Père Ubu, which is, I think, in the Aramont Library as well, illustrated by Georges Rouault. You have a photo here. One of his artists, you also will see the circus by Georges Rouault in a splendid binding as well. So Vollard is really at the beginning of this 20th century livre d'artiste as we have defined it. He died in a car accident in 1939, and had in his safe, if I can say, more than 25 projects of livre d'artiste that never been seen. The second very important publisher is Daniel Henri Canveller. He was a German based in Paris. He opened his gallery in 1907 to promote, again, the avant-garde movement, especially Cubism. So following Vollard's steps, they were not very good friends. He published his first book in 1909, which is L'Enchanteur Pourrissant, illustrated by fantastic cubist woodcut by André Derain. Then Canveller also did some cubist illustrated Picasso books, including the Max Jacob we've told before, which coincidentally is we're only trying to get to the details in my job, and it's the only cubist Harlequin ever engraved by Picasso, so that's something. And also the one next to the Harlequin is Saint-Matorel, also by Max Jacob, so he's very good friends from the Montmartre. Canveller has a tough history because he was German, but very attached to France. So when the World War I started, is when he was in Italy and couldn't go back to France because he was German. So he immigrated he spent his wartime in Switzerland. And when he came back, he couldn't do his business with his name, so he had to associate with André Simon. So now all the books published by Canveller will be published under the name Galerie Simon. And in 1941, when the Second World War started, he had to sell his gallery to his wife, daughter Louise, who was married to Michel Leiris, and so the publication were under the Louise Leiris name. But he still. It's very interesting how he kept he kept the tradition of the book publishing by having his printed device engraved by André de Rhin. Printed devices were used by printers in the 15th and 16th century, even a little bit later, and those disappeared then. So Canveller, wisely, I think, had his printing device on all the books, even when it was under the name of Louise Léris or André Simon. I'm going to follow quickly by Aimé Mag's, Gérald Kramer, and Yvon Lambert. Aimé Mag was a gallerist as well, very famous, active mostly after the war. His main books is one of the 20-ish Miro illustrated books that are in the Aramont Library, which is Parler Seul, on a text by Tristan Zara. And he was, as Vollard and Canveller, really focused on promoting his artists, mostly Miro, Georges Braque, a lot, Mayol, and some post-war artists, including Tapies and Chillida. Then another very interesting character is Gérald Kramer. Gérald Kramer was a print dealer, and based in Switzerland. And his masterpiece is a book that is in the Aramont Library as well, illustrated by Miro, which is À toute épreuve, illustrated by something like 80, woodcut by Miro, very advanced books because it had to the woodcut in color and black and white. It also had some collage, which was really never seen before. And Sobi, that probably you've heard about, described the book as one of the most triumphant feats of book illustration of our century. So this is really something, if you can, you must see. The interesting thing with Gérald Kramer is that for my work and probably for the creative work as well, they have, Gérald and his son Patrick, who is still active, contributed to better knowledge of the artist books by publishing also the most important reference book for the livre d'artiste by artists. So you have Picasso, you have Miro, you have Chagall, and you have André Masson, for example. That now we have the complete census of all the books they've illustrated. I'm going to end on the art dealer with Yvon Lambert. Yvon Lambert is very interesting because he's still active. I mean, it's not active, but it's still alive. He was born in 1936. He has a contemporary art gallery. He opened a foundation in Avignon in 2000, and he published 28 books in a collection he named Une rêverie émanée de mes loisirs, which I would translate badly by a daydream emanated from my hobbies. With masterpieces, with contemporary artists, his artists, and one of the most interesting books, I think, always subjective, would be, sorry for my German, Hansel Kiefer, Die Ugeburennen, maybe, published in 2002. So the interesting thing is, over a century, there have been some gallerists publishing books, artist books, to promote their own artists until now. Even if Yvon Lambert has stopped his publishing activity, we kind of hope this tradition will remain. I'm going to follow with two of my favorites, I have to say, who are Pierre-André Benoit and Ilyas Danevich, name Ilyas. Pierre-André Benoit, name aka Pab, very easily. It's 1921, 1993. It was a very, very strange character. We don't know how it started. He published his first book in, I think, 1949, when he bought a press. A small press that he set up in his hometown of Alès in the south of France. And until his death in 1993, he published more than 1,000 books. It's usually those are very small books. The larger would be the quarto with the format, which would be an A4 kind of, to put it in our terms, with little text, sometimes just a poem, but mostly illustrated. And what is very striking with his production is, even though he was printing books in very, very small numbers, some at only 2 or 3 copies, he managed to associate his production with the top artists of his time, including Picasso, Duchamp, Miro, Max Ernst, Picabia, Dubuffet, really everyone. So on the right is one of the, it's a 2 copy, but I think there's a little bit more than 2 copies. But it's a 2 or 3 copies illustrated books by Picasso, Si large mon image, which is, and we know there's 1 copy in the PAB collection that had been sold 20 years ago, and another one at Picasso's collection, probably. And so how can he got the most important artist of the 20th century to do this kind of production is quite fascinating. His other record would be to have printed the smallest of all the Picasso's prints ever made. This one on the slide is just the second smallest. I couldn't find the photo of the very little one. This one is about 1.2 by 1.8 inches, which is 3 to 4.5 centimeters in European way. The other one, this one is called Meur. I think it was interesting to see that obviously the Spanish culture and Tauromachi has always inspired Picasso. The other one is a book called Temperature, which is less than 1 inch by 1.5 inch. So it's basically half of a thumb. He did in his career printed large books, so he went to the Imprimerie de l'Union, which is a very important printing press in Paris. I have to go back to this one. Another strange things about PAB is that he had no money, and he didn't do any money from the sale of the books. So he had to be creative, and I don't know if it's really visible on this, but the central engraving by Picasso, you can see some white space in that structure the illustration, and those prints were made on celluloid, which is like a kind of caoutchouc, and so those are cutouts of the original mattress, but he didn't throw away anything. And as you can see on both sides, you can recognize the shape of the holes that would be reused after by Picasso still, and you could do a puzzle with all this little thing. And again, having one of the most important artists of the century working with him on this kind of small printing books is quite fascinating. Except if I didn't look thoroughly enough in the inventory, I think the Aramont Library has 1 book illustrated by PAB, published by PAB, which is a Miro. The other free-spirited artist book creator. So again, PAB and Ilias had no gallery. They were not selling anything apart from their own books. So the other one would be Ilias, a fascinating character as well. He was born in Russia, in Georgia, in Tbilisi. And his publishing history started in 1913. He was very involved in the artistic avant-garde movement in Russia with the futurism, constructivism, and suprematism. sorry for all the ism, and worked closely with artists like Goncharova, Larionov, Malevich a little bit as well. He was also a champion of the zone poetry, which was a kind of revolutionary form of poetry which didn't care about grammar, didn't care about the verse or even word. It was all about sound and so so since the beginning he was very involved. I mean, he's an artist. He went to Paris in 1920 with other of these fellow citizens. And he published there in 1923 a book called Le Dentu, le phare, which is also a very interesting artist book with an original collage on the cover. And this was the first book published under his publication, his publication company names, the Degré 41, the Degree 41, which is a kind of interesting story because it comes from the latitude of Tiflis, which is his hometown. It's also the alcoholic content of brandy, 41 degrees. And it also the Celsius measure of the delirium-producing fever. So that's not a program. I don't know what it is. He went back to publishing in 1940 after he met Picasso in the 30s with a book. Oh well, that was this one called Afat, which was his own text. It's bilingual French and Russian and French poem by Ilias. It's one of a very important Picasso books to this day. Another funny story about him was, as I was saying, he was part of the creation of the Zoom poetry. And at the end of the 40s, a group of young poets, French poets, led by Isidore Isou, invented, or in their own terms, the lettrism, which was a poetry which didn't really care about grammar and vocabulary and everything. And he was like, okay, I've created this new poetic movement. And Ilias saw that and said, well, young boy, if I may, we've done that 25 years ago. And he published a book called Poésie de mots inconnus, Poetry of Unknown Words, in 1949, illustrated by no less than 23 artists, including Miro, Matisse, Giacometti, Léger, Art, Picasso, so many others. And texts from his time in Russia by his friends, Kochenik, between others, and Larionov, and those who were at the beginning of this. His masterpiece, in my opinion, would be the Maximiliana, which you can see here, which has a very interesting story, but I don't think I've got enough time. Okay, very, very quickly. Published in 1964, Maximiliana is a text by Ernst William Temple, which was a self-made astronomer of the 19th century German. And he discovered an asteroid. He wanted to call it Maximiliana. The community, scientist community, didn't want that because he was not part of it. And when Ilias found this text, he just connected all the dots and said, Max Ernst, you have to illustrate these books, because the name of the astronomer is Ernst William Temple. Maximiliana is obviously Max Ernst, and the anagram of star in German, which is Stern, is Ernst. So in his mind, every dot were connecting, and he made this amazing books in 1964. He ended up publishing in 1974 the books illustrated by Miro, Le Courtisan Grotesque, which is in the Aramont Library. And I think I'm going to stop here to leave more people the time to talk. Anyway, fantastic library, fantastic collection. Very glad that the American institution are starting to get interested in those very French books or European. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adrian. And I'm so sorry to cut you off. I do have the unenviable task of trying to keep us on time. But I would say keep your eyes open. There is a PAB. I've been saying PAB. We say PAB. That's what I should be saying. There's a wonderful PAB book in the display this evening, so definitely keep your eyes open for it. Next, we're going to hear from Patrick Hastings. In addition to being the English chair, he is also a Ulysses scholar, and he is going to take us through James Joyce's 1922 monster novel. Please welcome Patrick.
I don't have anything to say about these.
Don't look. Okay, you ready? No, it's going to be you after that.
Okay. Thank you, Emily, and thank you for the overwhelming honor of being able to contribute to this symposium here today. Every great book has a story. Now, I realize this is likely the least groundbreaking statement ever made from a podium at the Library of Congress. But beyond the obvious notion that most novels have plots, I mean that there's often an interesting story behind our great books, the historical and biographical adventures that ultimately result in a literary work being brought into the world. And I also mean that the owner of any great book likely has a story of where and when they got that book, how it came to be treasured in that person's hands, read, and loved. Today, I have the opportunity to tell a few stories of a truly great book as I seek to put Ulysses in context. First, I will offer some thoughts on James Joyce's novel itself and why it remains so significant to our culture a century after its initial publication. I'll hope to identify a few elements of Ulysses that allow it to remain so meaningful in our current socio-political context. Then I will tell briefly the remarkable story of this book's first edition publication in 1922. In the context of today's symposium on the making of the modern book, I will explain a few of the unlikely circumstances that helped shape the first edition of Joyce's modernist epic. Finally, I will tell the story of perhaps the most remarkable single copy of that first edition, the Aramont Ulysses, recently donated to the Library of Congress, and itself the subject of amazement and curiosity. This copy of Ulysses is literally filled with contextual content that tells a story about the novel's early readership and scholarship. First, though, let's put Ulysses itself in context. Ulysses tells the story of June 16, 1904, as two men, 38-year-old Mr. Leopold Bloom and 22-year-old Stephen Dedalus, go about their day wandering around Dublin, Ireland. The events are fairly unremarkable. There's some adolescent intellectual sparring, some running of errands, some eating and drinking. Nothing too special. The correspondence to Homer's Odyssey, though, suggests that the simple ability to endure the ups and downs of this sort of normal modern weekday can and should be regarded as heroic. The novel's depiction of this fairly typical day, even 100 years after its publication, retains a feeling of the contemporary, of being of our time. It engages and expresses what it means to be a human in the modern world, in a fast-paced urban environment with an interconnected public transit system, with mass media surrounding and influencing common discourse, with its depiction of a globalized economy and a decentralized secular culture. The novel's central character, Mr. Bloom, works as an advertising agent and notices ads all day, just as we all do, whether consciously or not. The novel's treatment of the character's chief concerns, including social isolation, principled individualism, family tension, and widespread gossip, all feel relevant and engaging to readers today. Mr. Bloom is also an exceedingly generous person, and he commits various acts of unseen kindness throughout the day. He helps a blind man cross the street, He makes time for small talk, even with people he finds annoying. He donates to charity. He takes really good care of his cat. With today's symposium, we have an occasion to steep ourselves in the novel's spirit of generosity as we celebrate the incredible fact of the anonymous donation of the Aramont collection to the Library of Congress. And timely now as ever, Ulysses espouses inclusiveness. Mr. Bloom is a Jewish man in Dublin at the turn of the century. He endures and confronts an atmosphere of anti-Semitism throughout the course of the single day we spend with him. We have access to Mr. Bloom's thoughts and feelings in these tense moments. And through Joyce's innovative technique of inner monologue, we develop a sense of a call to empathy. Having experienced the world through the thoughts of Mr. Bloom and having gained an appreciation for the depth of humanity we all share, how can we not be careful of the real people we encounter in our daily lives? The writing style of the novel further emphasizes this spirit of inclusivity in the way that Joyce absorbs so many different types of writing into Ulysses. We have a chapter written in the style of a syrupy sweet Victorian romance novel, sitting alongside a chapter written in the form of a surrealist play. We have chapters that contain literally dozens of styles, from legal contracts to sports journalism, from medieval legend to Dickensian narrative, all demonstrating the democratic ideal that differences can coexist together and indeed can each inform and strengthen the other. Now, it's true that this novel has a reputation for being challenging. Joyce himself said that the demand I make of my readers is that they should devote their entire lives to reading my works. But he also said that if Ulysses isn't fit to read, then life isn't fit to live. Both statements are true. With its intricate systems of illusion and symbolism and the way that the book's hundreds of characters are ingeniously networked and interconnected, Ulysses humbles even the brightest reader. It has an endless capacity to astonish and to amuse with new details just waiting to be noticed and appreciated. This continual discovery prompts readers of Ulysses to see it as endlessly new, and it gives the novel the generative power to inspire creativity. The story of this book's publication is just as distinctive as Ulysses itself. The novel was first published in 1922 by an American woman named Sylvia Beach under the imprint of her Paris bookshop, Shakespeare and Company. Without any prior publishing experience, Sylvia stepped into the breach to publish the novel using French printers when authorities in the English-speaking world had banned the book for its obscenity and blasphemous content. In France, Sylvia and the printer Maurice Durantier of Dijon were beyond the reach of American censorship laws. Beach's respect for Joyce's art was so profound that she afforded him unfettered freedom to revise his text throughout the publication process, and he took full advantage, using the page proofs, which were meant only to be used for corrections of errors, as an opportunity to rewrite the book, adding words, sentences, and full paragraphs all across the text that ultimately contribute to the dense web of interrelated allusions, symbols, and descriptive details that make Ulysses so remarkable. Now, in terms of bookmaking, this wasn't cheap or easy. Joyce's editions displaced huge chunks of the text as laid out on the printing plates, making the printers add, move, and reconstitute text on nearly every page of the novel. It is estimated that Joyce wrote upwards of a third of the book at proof stage, making the context of Ulysses' publication history consequential to the text itself. We simply would not have the masterpiece that we know as Ulysses without the generosity of its publisher, Sylvia Beach, and the patience of its printer, Maurice Durantier. Durantier came from a family of printers and was an artist in his own right, using a hand press and fine materials. And the first edition he produced was a beautiful book. He spent months hunting down the exact shade of Greek blue Joyce desired for the cover. He eventually found the right color pigment in Germany and then had to lithograph it onto the book's paper cover. Lithography is a fairly technical design process whereby color is added to paper using chemical combinations, oil-based printer's ink, water, and repellent greasy ink or crayon. The printer applies light pressure to the paper atop a prepared stone. The use of this process also meant that the first edition of Ulysses was only available in paperback. Beach and Durantier sourced thick, handmade paper from 3 prestigious mills. I've had the opportunity to leaf through a first edition, and I can attest that the paper is luscious. Plus, the first edition is massive. 9.5 inches by 7.5 inches, 3 inches thick, and nearly 3 pounds in weight. A substantial tome in terms of its literary content as well as in its physical heft. I'd like now to tell the story of the specific copy of the first edition that is included in the Aramont Library. It was initially owned by a man named Jacques Benoit Minchin, who was recognized as a teenage prodigy within Parisian intellectual circles and was among the very first people to join the Shakespeare and Company lending library when the shop opened in November of 1919. A voracious and serious reader, Benoit Minchin was one of Joyce's earliest and most enthusiastic fans. He described himself as being carried away by Joyce's genius. Because Shakespeare and Company, the headquarters of the lost generation of American writers, was right across the street from an avant-garde French bookshop run by Adrien Monnier, this quiet little street on the left bank of Paris became a hub of international modernism. Within this dynamic artistic community, Jacques Benoit Minchin was so highly regarded, even at his young age, that he was asked by Valérie Larbaud and Adrien Monnier to translate parts of Ulysses for a book launch event that would involve a lecture and readings from the novel. And this kid had the audacity to attach conditions to his acceptance of this assignment. First, he demanded that the project be kept secret from his father. Remember that Ulysses at this time was a scandalous novel being banned as obscenity around the world, and that Jacques Benoit Minchin was only 19. A boy could get seriously busted for having a book like Ulysses in his closet. Benoit Minchin's second condition was having access to Joyce for consultation as he worked. One such meeting between Benoit Minchin and Joyce resulted in an alteration to a significant moment in the text of Ulysses. One of the episodes of the novel that he was asked to translate is the Penelope episode, the final chapter of the novel, which presents the uninterrupted stream of consciousness of Mr. Bloom's wife, Molly, in 8 sentences that flow over 50 pages. In the passionate final flurry of Molly's thoughts, she recalls the picnic lunch where Leopold Bloom proposed to her. In this climactic conclusion of the novel, the draft from which Benoit Minchin was translating had Molly think, "Yes, I said yes, I will." But Benoit Minchin wanted to add a final oui, arguing that in French, ending the sentence with oui is stronger and more natural, as "Eh oui, j'ai dit oui, j'ai vu bien oui." Imagine, as a teenager, editing the final word of James Joyce's masterpiece. The two spent hours in discussion and debate, with Benoit Minchin arguing that a final yes ends the novel with a note of optimism, affirmation, and acceptance of the world beyond the individual self, whereas ending with "I will" strikes a more authoritative and Luciferian tone. Joyce agreed with him. In addition to the translation of the Penelope episode, Joyce also entrusted Jacques Benoit Minchin with the task of transcribing the musical notations to the Little Harry Hughes song that appears in the Ithaca episode. This moment in the text is curious and the subject of critical debate. Here's the context. After following our two protagonists for 18 hours, we finally get Stephen Dedalus and Mr. Bloom together, and they are chatting on a diverse range of topics. They seem to be getting along well. The reader is poised to celebrate the successful return of our Odysseus, Mr. Bloom, to his Ithaca, 7 Eccles Street. In Dublin, he has found his Telemachus, a son-like figure toward whom he can direct his hitherto thwarted paternal instincts. But then, just as their conversation crescendos, Bloom encourages Stephen to open up his beautiful tenor voice in song, and Stephen sings Little Harry Hughes, a medieval ballad that tells the story of an innocent little Christian boy's murder after being lured into a Jew's home. Why, readers wonder, does Stephen, while sitting in the kitchen of this kindly Jewish man, choose to sing an anti-Semitic legend dating back to 1255? This is one of the questions that confirms something that Joyce told Jacques Benoit Minchin. I've put in so many enigmas and puzzles that Ulysses will keep the professors busy for centuries arguing over what I meant, and that's the only way of ensuring one's immortality. In both of these instances, the addition of the final yes in Penelope and the insertion of the musical notations in Ithaca, we can see Jacques Benoit Minchin's generative collaboration with Joyce, his substantive and lasting impact on the text itself. In a signal of Joyce's appreciation for Benoit Minchin's collaboration and friendship, Joyce personally inscribed his copy of the first edition on February 24th, 1922, a mere 3 weeks after Joyce himself received the very first copy on February 2nd for his 40th birthday. This means that Joyce made sure that Benoit Minchin held one of the very first few copies of the novel ever printed. And Benoit Minchin continued to be inspired by the creative spirit of Ulysses, turning his copy of the book into a unique objet d'art, the exquisite and somewhat mysterious item included in the Aramont collection we are here to celebrate. First, let's look at the binding that Benoit Minchin commissioned for his copy of Ulysses. Sturdy and leather-bound, the spine protects that fragile paperback while echoing the Greek blue of the original cover in the lettering. But the watercolor inlays on the front and back cover steal the show. Gorgeous hand-drawn maps of Dublin, the setting of Ulysses, and Gibraltar, Molly Bloom's hometown. Given that Molly's soliloquy, which Jacques Benoit Minchin translated, includes descriptive evocations of her childhood in Gibraltar, this map is personally meaningful to Benoit Minchin's collaboration with Joyce. Inside the edition, we find unique photographs of Sylvia Beach and James Joyce, or at least I've never seen this photo before, and I've clicked through more pages of Google image search results for the query James Joyce than I care to admit. This book includes a letter from Joyce which thanks Benoit Minchin for his musical notations for Ithaca and offers hope that reading Ulysses was providing, quote, some relief against the trials of the young man's military service as part of the French occupation of the Rhineland after World War I. The next element that distinguishes the Aramont copy of the first edition is the pull-out schema glued into the back cover of the book. This document outlines Ulysses' various conceptual systems and provides a scaffolding for the reader's initial understanding and interpretation of the novel. I don't think it is hyperbole to say that Joyce's schema for Ulysses is among the most important contextual items in literary history. Here's how it works. The schema lists 8 categories of information that reveal the novel's basic ideas and symbols, including the Homeric titles that correspond to each episode, such as Telemachus, Circe, and Sirens. Yes, Joyce made his readers go outside of the text of the novel, even to discover the book's chapter titles. Like, come on, Jimmy Joyce, help us out, man. The other columns contain information such as the hour of the day during which the episode occurs, the scene or location within Dublin that serves as that chapter's setting, and the narrative technique he employed in writing each chapter. He even identifies a bodily organ for each episode. More on that in a minute. This version of the schema is typed on 4 sheets of paper glued together to form a single oblong sheet. And I don't know if it is crass to mention this sort of thing here, but a carbon copy of this fold-out schema sold for nearly $60,000 in a Sotheby's auction. Combined with the fact that a well-preserved first edition of Ulysses sells in the range of $100,000 to $600,000, you can begin to see the cultural and monetary value placed on these sorts of Joyce materials by scholars and collectors. But what makes the Aramont Ulysses priceless is a very curious item in the back of the book, a one-of-a-kind schema for Ulysses designed on an anatomical mannequin, such as one might find in a medical textbook. Just like Ulysses, this anatomical schema gets more astonishing as you continue to unfold and reveal its layers of depth and careful complexity. The novel's schematic notes and correspondences are written on the bodily organ Joyce identified for each episode. Here is the schematic information for the Hades episode, written on the heart, which Joyce listed as the organ for this episode in part because this chapter depicts the funeral of a man who died of heart failure. And here is Lestrygonians, which depicts Mr. Bloom's lunchtime, written on the esophagus. This anatomical schema is an incredible piece of contextual matter, and you have to wonder, who made this thing? I got a lot of unknowing shrugs when I first asked this question. We don't know for sure. I can imagine Joyce himself making it, and it seems like the kind of winking, funny little project that would have amused him. I set out to compare the handwriting on the diagram to Joyce's handwriting in one of his archival notebooks. Now, Joyce's handwriting was described by the Lost Generation poet Robert McAlmon as minute and hen-scrawly, very difficult to decipher. And I'm not trained as a handwriting analyst, but you can see clear similarities in the handwriting in Joyce's manuscript in black and the writing on the anatomical schema in red ink. Here are a few capital B's and CH, the word and, this distinctive epsilon capital E, these loopy, swirly lowercase d's, lowercase m's, these two similar GIs and ANs as found in gigantism on the left and giant on the right. See the way the lowercase g connects with the I in both? There are some lowercase b's, th, and the word who. Given these similarities, I was pretty confident that the handwriting on the anatomical schema was Joyce's, and it was exhilarating to find these matches. But as my excitement subsided, I put on a more responsible scholarly hat and thought, okay, but just to be certain, who would be the next most likely person to have made this thing? And the answer has to be Jacques Benoit Méchain, the owner of this copy of Ulysses, who had access to the schema and was an enthusiast for the novel. And what does his handwriting look like? Well, I opened my copy of Ulysses, found the transcription of the Little Harry Hughes song described earlier, and said, well, shoot. Here are comparisons of the handwriting found in Benoit Méchain's writing and the anatomical schema and Joyce's manuscripts. Now, I want to be clear, Joyce's handwriting is very similar to Benoit Méchain's. I've read a number of scholarly articles that misidentify the hand that wrote the Little Harry Hughes lyrics as Joyce's. Such are the similarities in the two men's script. But here's TH, lowercase d's, conjoined lowercase r's, and non-conjoined r's. After examining these and many other handwriting samples, I realized that Benoit Méchain was likely to have made this truly delightful anatomical schema as another fun little way of adding his own context to Ulysses, which provides an appropriate takeaway, I think, to today's event and the celebration of the Aramont collection as a whole, a takeaway that I suspect will come as no surprise to most of you here in this room. People who love literature, and fans of James Joyce's Ulysses in particular, can't help but create in response to the books we read. Whether we journal, or craft bindings, or compose musical scores, or copy literary schemata onto anatomical diagrams, many readers, great readers, feel inspired to reciprocate and to reward the writer's creative act. We are here today to celebrate the Aramont Library, which itself is expressive of a generative love of books and was assembled and curated with artistic care. As you explore the exhibition this afternoon, I hope you enjoy imagining Jacques Benoit Méchain's Ulysses in the extraordinary context of the Aramont collection. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. That was really fabulous. So I have a little bit of an idea. I'm thinking that instead of doing a Q&A after our final speaker, we can just talk to them in person in the Woodall Pavilion at our little reception starting at 5. So find these folks, they'll be down there. I'm really excited to introduce Gabby Cooksey. As I mentioned, Gabby is a bookbinder and a book artist from Tacoma, Washington, and she is going to talk to us about how these incredible exhibition bindings get made. She's also brought a prop that I'm going to be passing around so you can actually feel some of this stuff because you won't be allowed to touch the books in the display. So with that, please welcome Gabby.
First of all, I'd like to thank Stephanie and Emily for inviting me to be here today. It's a lovely thing to be asked to talk about what you love, let alone from the Library of Congress. It was a dream of mine to get a book into this library, and in 2016, it became true. I was jumping up and down in my studio, called my mentors and my ma, danced around, got ice cream to celebrate, and it was lovely. And that's exactly how it felt to get asked to do this talk, so thank you. My name is Gabby Cooksey, and I'm a full-time bookbinder and book artist in Tacoma, Washington. I tend to use unusual materials on my bindings, so that's what I'm bringing you today, a look behind the scenes of my studio. The Aramont collection has a plethora of techniques used on the covers, so I wanted to combine my work and a few from the Aramont to show you how we put things on covers, because that can be a little unknown. I attended traditional schools for bookbinding at the American Academy of Bookbinding and graduating from North Bennett Street School in 2014. I had a 6-year studio assistant job with Don Glaister and Suzanne Moore, prominent bookbinder and book artist couple, that really shone the light on materials I could use on books and gain confidence with my creativity. I want to note that I'll be talking about design bindings and artist books. So that you understand this jargon, a design binding is typically an already made book, say Alice in Wonderland, and the binder rebinds the book, usually with leather, and showing off their skills on the cover. An artist book is a book where the artist and or bookbinder creates the whole thing, writes it, illustrates it, prints it, and binds it. To begin, I wanted to share with you the first binding I felt the spark of excitement of what I could do. In 2011, while at the American Academy of Bookbinding, I bound the book Fantasy and Nonsense using shark teeth. The hunt for materials in the mountains of Colorado, daydreaming about how it would look, and figuring out how to puzzle everything together really hooked me, and the positive response was really infectious. Another binding where I thought I found my groove was for my artist book, The Book of Penumbra. I did a design binding in 2015 using 7 black pearls that I dremeled out to look like skulls and wired them to the cover. What a fun thing to figure out, and I still look back fondly on this book. The book is about death gods from around the world, so I think I appeased them by making this cool book for them. This is the close-up of the dremeled out skulls, so you can see that I like sticking things on books, and I want to show you how I do that. Here's a drawer full of bits and bobs that I have in my studio. There's a lot going on here, and I love that. I love that I have drawers labeled butterfly wings, glass goat eyes, and teeth. The Aramont collection is a little more tame than this, but the craftsmanship is divine and uses some of these techniques in a more subtle way. I'm usually asked, why am I drawn to these unusual materials? Well, it could be that I like puzzling ways on how to put them on a cover, or I like the shock effect, but truly I love nature, and I love morbid things, and I love putting things front and center to make you look at it and touch it, because after all, I hope my bindings make you want to open the book. Another question one might have is, where do I source some of these materials? Sometimes I buy them from a reputable site like the Emerald Jewel Beetle Wings from Thailand that you'll see later, but I mainly seek them out. When I go on travels, I'll go to a curiosity shop or walk along the beach and find a cool rock. Sometimes I get bones left on my porch by friends because they know I'll love it. And one time while working in Don and Suzanne's studio, Don had been cleaning out under the porch and found a raccoon art. He knew I would enjoy it, so he left it on my bench for me to find the next day. It's still prominently displayed in my own studio. For this talk, I made a plaquette that should be going around so you can feel it, and a plaquette is a mock-up cover, so this is where I test out my ideas first before doing it on the real book. I am showing 6 skills: adding and removing board, inlays, onlays, brass, tattooing, and 3D objects. So let's get to it. This first technique I'd like to show is adding or removing board, a simple and quick way to add dimension to the cover. Here I am removing board, first cutting out the shape, making sure it's smooth. You'll see every little bump through the leather if you don't take the time to smooth things out. I then paste up the leather and cover the board with it, really pressing down with my palms to make sure I can see the hint of the design. The palms are such a good tool. I do the turn-ins and the corners on the plaquette next. I then go back with a Teflon bone folder and gently go over the line work again. Wet leather is notoriously fragile and you can easily slip and mar the leather. So just go slow and all will be well. This is an example of a design binding for my artist book Blight using this technique. I wanted to create a larger root ball than what the brass was doing, so I took away layers of board on the outside edge. I also took away board where the brass sits, so it could fit snugly into the cover and not be protruding too far out. This is a close-up of the cover where you can see the 3 layers of brass and how thick the boards are on the covers. The brass was attached using flesh rivets. A book from the Aramont collection by Don Glaister, who I mentioned earlier, did a design binding on a poetry book by Yeats. Don likes to create illusions of depth using this technique. You can really see it in the V in the bottom right corner, creating the lapels of the jacket. There are also onlays on the cover, which I'll be talking about next, so I'll point them out now. They are the aluminum hanger, that white arc in the center, the serrated scissors at the top edge of the book, and the button on the spine. Those are all onlays. So onto onlays and tattoos. The tattooed leather will be the base of my onlay. An onlay is a piece of leather or paper adhered directly to the cover. I learned how to tattoo in the spring of 2021 through YouTube videos and asking my own tattoo artist for tips. I fell in love with the illustrative effect right away. Once I'm done tattooing and all is dry, I can cut out my shape, which is the circle. I go very slow, making sure to cut to the board, and then I'll gently lift up. I then prep the cover on the plaquette by scraping and roughing up the leather for better adherence. I paste up the onlay 3 to 4 times. I'm only showing once here, but you really want to make sure the paste is saturated through, and then you just stick it down right on the plaquette. I make sure none of the paste is coming through out of the edges by using my fingernail or bone folder, and you want it dry before you do anything else. An example of tattooing is for the book Dark Archives by Megan Rosenblum. I did this in 2021 for an exhibition for Ian Kahn of Lux Mentis Booksellers. I have always wanted to tattoo, wow. So here was my chance on a book about human skin bindings. It took about 2 months of experimentation to get the tattooing how I wanted it. I did this with a tattoo gun, and it's very similar to tattooing on human skin. I myself am too nervous to tattoo on someone, let alone myself, but the process is the same, except a tattoo shop is more sterile. Here you can see some of the tattoo process. I use a stencil, much like a normal tattoo, to follow what I'm doing. You can see the ink and the ointment, which helps the tattoo gun glide over the surface, really darkens the leather in that bottom right corner. I'll wipe most of the ink off later, but there will remain a shadow seeped into the leather. I did an onlay for my artist book, Pangolin Pandemic. The vellum pangolin tail is tacked straight onto the cover.
This is in the display.
The inside pages of Pangolin Pandemic are made up of hundreds of onlays to form the scales of the pangolins. These scales are either made up of paper, wallpaper, or cloth onlays. This design binding of Animal Farm by me uses vellum onlays for the skin, black leather goat skin onlays for the shadows, and strawberry paper onlays for the nose to make up the smoking pig head. The book is made up of beautiful illustrations by Jonathan Hammer, and that's where I got this pig head from. A close-up of one of the pig heads to really show the strawberry paper nose. This binding by Riviere from the Aramont collection is a beautiful example of onlays. The 2 snakes outlining the cover is made up of yellow and blue and red scales. The brown leather eye shape in the center is also an onlay. Next is brass and inlays. An inlay is a good way to keep everything flush with the cover of the book, so when you lay the book flat, nothing catches on the surface. In this video, I'm working with brass and use it as my inlay. I first cut the brass out using a jeweler's saw, which is a really slow process. The blades on the saw are very thin and delicate. I could use a laser cutter to do all my brass work, but I think it loses the humanity of it. I like the time it takes, the skill involved, and knowing I did it all. And then I file and sand the brass to how I want. I placed the piece on the leather and cut exactly along the edge. Luckily, the brass has a hard edge to cut against. Make sure you cut to the board and gently remove the leather, making sure you're not lifting up the outer leather. And then you double check to see if it fits, and see if it's all flush. I then epoxy the brass to the board. I love using brass, as you can see. The most recent binding I did at the end of 2022 was for Gulliver's Travels. It's a 2-volume book, but I'm showing only one here because this one was a behemoth and I'm quite proud. At 18.5 inches tall and weighs in at 21 pounds with the clamshell box, it was a really toughie to cover. This was all cut out with a jeweler's saw. I learned a lot about cutting big pieces of brass, such as how to make the cuts on the inside of the brass when my saw's jaw wasn't big enough. There was a lot of dremeling and filing involved. Here's a close-up of the 2 layers of brass. I wanted to show depth and the illustrative lines of the rats. This was adhered down with epoxy. There are lots of examples of inlays in the Aramont. This lovely the row binding with a pink boa snake skin is an inlay. Another LaRoe binding using box calf inlays, and box calf is a chrome tan calf skin leather. And this Martin book using wood veneer puzzled together as an inlay. Don Glaister uses a combination of inlays, onlays, and cutouts in his artist book, The Voyager. There is aluminum, plastic, airbrush, acrylic, and more, which really adds to the dynamic nature of the book's content. Now, on to flat 3D objects. I like to use brass wire a lot in my work. It's easy to use, cheaper, and it's sandable. This cut rock is being mounted in place using 4 wires. I drill the holes in the cover and cut the wire oversized to make sure there is enough to crimp over onto the back. I make right angle crimps on the wire and mount the rock in between them. Then we have to deal with the back cover where all the wires are poking out. I pull the wires taut, fixing the front, and then cut channels out of the board, so whenever I crimp over the wire, they have a place to go. I fill the channels with epoxy, checking on it every couple hours to make sure the wire is staying down, but once dry, I can sand everything flat. You want it flat on the back so there are no unsightly bumps when you line the back. This miniature design binding bound by me, called the Little Book of Fay, uses wide gold wire to create arcs around the abalone shell. The shell is also held on with the gold wire and framed with chicken feet leather onlays. A different angle of the miniature book to really see the abalone shell protruding from the cover. I created a special clamshell box to house the book so nothing gets damaged. From the Aramont collection, we have this clamshell box by an unknown binder. I'm not 100% sure how they tacked the book cloth pants on, but I'm guessing they're sewn onto the spine or they're just glued. Finally, we end with an irregular 3D shape. I'm using a gator claw I picked up in a Portland, Oregon store on my travels. I could have wired this down, but I chose to rivet it with 2 pins. I first drill holes into the claw, insert the pins in, poke little holes into the cover where I want it to go, Dremel the cover, and then insert the pins through everything. Next, I use clippers to cut close to the board, riveting the pin down, creating another pin head on the inside cover so everything is locked in place. And we're done. I used this technique on my design binding for my artist book, Chronicles of a Coleopterous Strikingly Curious Swarm. I purchased 100 emerald jewel beetle wings online from Thailand and used a pin similar to the one in the video to mount them. The only difference is that I crimped them on the inside cover, much like the wire, since they were very thin pins. This is a close-up of the beetle wings and pins. Some are pinned really well to the cover, while others have some slack in the pin so the wings flutter a bit. Some of these techniques were taught to me traditionally at school, but a lot of it was experimentation. They don't teach you how to wire parakeet wings on a book at school. I have a box of plaquettes where I test out my ideas to see if they work. Some failed, like trying to hinge a piece of brass over a spine, or tattooing on very grainy or bumpy leather, but you never know until you try. The plaquettes are also a nice thing to look back on to see what worked and did not. So there you have it, my procession of lovely and unusual bindings and a sprinkling from the Aramont. I hope what you gained was some insight on the skills used in binding so you can point them out for yourself in the exhibition. But beware, some binders are tricky and like to really hide how they do it to keep you guessing, and I love that. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your time tonight.
Thank you so much, Gabby, and thank you to all of our wonderful panelists. This is wonderful. I don't know about you guys, but I could use a glass of wine. So please join us downstairs in the Woodall Pavilion for our reception. Our displays are also now set up, so if you go down the hallway and up to the mezzanine level of the Great Hall, you'll get to check out all the books for yourself. I hope to see you guys back here at 7 for Artists Approach the Book. Thank you.